Welcome back. The Wiesenthal Center is named for Simon Wiesenthal, a Holocaust survivor who dedicated his life to documenting the crimes of the Holocaust and hunting down its perpetrators. Today, its mission is to combat hatred, anti-Semitism, and terrorism. To explain why Nazism is experiencing a moment of rebirth in Europe right now, we turn to Mark Weitzman. He is the director of the Task Force Against Hate and Terrorism at the Wiesenthal Center. Our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman, he spoke with Mark, who explained that a number of forces, including the economic downturn, are at play.
Is there a way to pinpoint why we're seeing this new rise of Nazism in Europe?
I think we're seeing it for a couple of reasons. One of it is certainly economic conditions are rough, or rougher than they've been in a long time. Generally, a rule of thumb has been that when there's economic unrest, racism in general peaks, and anti-Semitism certainly peaks. Even though it's not a connected issue directly, the Middle East factors into this. And when things happen in the Middle East, and when Israel is targeted in a form of a double standard or very extremist rhetoric, that has an impact on the local population and their attitudes toward local Jews, evidently.
How are the governments responding? Are they responding?
Hungarian government, I think, has realized in the last year or so that it may have tipped a little too far. It's a right-wing government that has been very protective of the extreme right-wing party. Lithuania, the government has also been moving slowly. One of the fears that these governments have is that if they move too fast, they will look like they're caving into international interest, including, quote, Jewish interest. So they want to protect their right flank.
But you know what, Mark? Latvia, Lithuania, Hungary, these were all places that were under Nazi control at one point. There's hardly any Jews left. They were either killed or they left. Why the anti-Semitism / Nazism in those areas?
You have it in those areas, I think, for a certain, well, for one thing, a lot of things were repressed by the communist rule up until the late 90s. The communists, really taking their signals from Russia, from Soviet Russia, really clamped down on history, on social issues, and so on. And so there were a lot of things that were never dealt with, but were just pushed or forbidden by law to come out. It's sort of like pulling the cork out of the bottle.
Right.
Once that happens, all sorts of things can pop out. And one of the things that popped out was this resurgent nationalism, which was, again, aimed both at the communists. There's a myth in many of these places that Jews were all communists or supporters of communists. So anyone who was anti-communist, anyone who was anti-Semitic, began to find ways that they can latch on and really express themselves publicly.
Are any other groups being targeted besides Jews?
Significant elements are targeting the Roma as well, the Gyps, what we would call the Gypsies. They are really being persecuted in many areas in Europe.
This feels like another throwback to Nazi Germany.
And there's also, sometimes you'll find a lot of homophobic sentiment as well in some of these groups. It's again, these are the traditional minorities of Europe.
This may sound like an odd question. I mean, we're two Jews talking about anti-Semitism and Nazism in Europe. And so for us, there's a natural, inherent connection to this. Why should a non-Jew care about the rise of Nazism?
What we're actually talking about is something larger. We're talking about the things that shape society and shape the world that we live in. To see Europe or the US or any place going backwards and returning to a world where people are judged just by the accident of their birth, their choice of religion, their gender, relationships, or so on, means that they're not being judged on the quality of who they are. And that's a step back for any society, and I think that has dangers for the entire world, as interconnected as we are today.
Mark, you're the co-editor of a book called Anti-Semitism, the Generic Hatred.
Correct.
Why generic? What is it about anti-Semitism that makes it generic in your mind?
I think what we're aiming at with that title was to show that anti-Semitism is sort of, in a sense, a seedbed of hatred. Meaning by that anti-Semitism seems to both be ubiquitous and where it appears, but on top of that, it also is the kind of thing that shows the path for other hatreds. People who generally embrace anti-Semitism are prone and open to embracing other hatreds. So in that sense, someone once compared it to the canary in the mine.
Right.
When there's anti-Semitism present, it means the quality of the air is poisoned and everyone is at risk.
In conclusion, it is critical to remember that hate comes in many forms, from the overt to the hidden. But hatred in any form is ignored at our own peril. Thank you very much for tuning in tonight, and have a great evening.